Kiriti trudged to the stream that fateful day, his body weak from exhaustion. His hands were calloused, his feet cracked, and his spirit carried the weight of endless labor. Yet his heart still held the ember of kindness, a flicker of light in a world that had grown unbearably dark. The sun bore down on him and the other slave boys as they filled heavy clay pots with water. Laughter and whispers from the nearby bank caught their attention. A group of women, dressed in fine wrappers and adorned with jewelry, stood near the edge of the stream, their faces glowing with wealth and privilege. Among them was a young woman, no older than 18, whose radiant beauty made her stand out even in her simplicity. Suddenly, a scream shattered the calm. "Help! Help!" one of the maids cried, her voice trembling. "The princess. She has fallen into the water." Kiriti turned just in time to see the princess struggling in the middle of the stream. The current was stronger than usual, churning like a hungry beast. She flailed her arms, her face barely breaking the surface before the waters dragged her under again. "Someone help her," the maid wailed, but none of the guards accompanying them dared to move. The stream was known for its treacherous undertows, and even skilled swimmers had been claimed by its depths. Kiriti's heart pounded in his chest. Memories of Addis flooded his mind, her laughter, her cries, her final moments. He couldn't save his sister, but maybe he could save this girl. His body acted before his mind could protest. "No, Kiriti," one of the slave boys shouted, grabbing his arm. "You'll drown." "I have to try," Kiriti said, his voice firm. He tore free and dove into the water. The moment he hit the icy water, panic gripped him. The current pulled at his frail body like an invisible hand, dragging him deeper. He wasn't a strong swimmer. He wasn't even a swimmer at all. But he kicked and trashed, forcing himself to move toward the princess, who was now barely visible, her arms reaching weakly above the surface. "Hold on," Kiriti yelled, though his voice was barely audible over the roar of the water. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he pushed forward. The princess's head dipped under again, and for a terrifying moment, Kiriti thought he was too late. Then, by some miracle, his fingers brushed against hers. "I've got you," he gasped, wrapping his arm around her waist. The current fought against him as he struggled to keep her head above water. His own body screamed in protest, every muscle begging for relief. The shore seemed impossibly far away. "Don't let me go," the princess whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. "I won't," Kiriti promised, though he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. On the river bank, the maids screamed and pointed, their cries blending with the rushing water. The guards stood frozen, helpless and uncertain. "He'll never make it," one of them muttered. But then, through sheer willpower, Kiriti began to inch closer to the shore. His legs kicked furiously, his arm gripped the princess tightly, and his mind focused on one thought: save her, . When they finally reached the shallows, Kiriti collapsed onto the muddy bank, dragging the princess with him. He coughed violently, water pouring from his mouth. The maids rushed forward, pulling the princess from his arms and laying her on the grass. "She's breathing," one of them cried. "She's alive." The princess opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Kiriti's. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Kiriti nodded, too exhausted to speak. News of the rescue spread quickly, and by evening, it had reached the ears of the princess's father, King Olumide of Ikeduru. The king was a formidable man, known for his wealth and power. When he heard of his daughter's near death and the boy who had risked his life to save her, he ordered his guards to fetch Kiriti at once. Alhaji Musa was sitting in his courtyard when the royal guards arrived, their polished armor gleaming in the twilight. "What brings the king's men to my home?" Alhaji Musa asked, his voice laced with suspicion. One of the guards stepped forward. "We have come for the boy, Kiriti. The king wishes to reward him." Alhaji Musa frowned. "Reward? That boy is mine. He owes me a debt." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Are you refusing the king's order?" Alhaji Musa hesitated. He was a greedy man, but even he knew better than to defy the king. "Fine," he said grudgingly. "Take him." Kiriti was brought to the palace, where he stood nervously before the king. His tattered clothes and sunken cheeks contrasted sharply with the opulence around him, the golden throne, the shimmering chandeliers, the rich scent of jasmine in the air. The princess sat beside her father, her face glowing with gratitude. "Kiriti," the king said, his deep voice filling the room. "My daughter tells me you saved her life. Is this true?" Kiriti bowed his head. "Yes, Your Majesty. You risked your life to save hers, knowing you could have died." "Why?" Kiriti's voice trembled as he replied. "I couldn't watch her drown, Your Majesty. I lost my sister to sickness because no one could save her. I didn't want another family to feel that pain." The king was silent for a moment, his stern face softening. "You are a brave boy, Kiriti. A boy with a heart far greater than your circumstances." He turned to Alhaji Musa, who had been summoned to the palace. "How much does this boy owe you?" Alhaji Musa hesitated, sensing the shift in power. 100 naira, he said. The king scoffed. 100 naira? I will pay you 10 times that amount. But the boy belongs to me now. Alhaji Musa opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it. "As you wish, Your Majesty." The king stood. "Kelechi, from this day forward, you are no longer a slave. You will live here, in my palace, as one of my guards. Do you accept?" Tears filled Kelechi's eyes as he knelt before the king. "Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you." As he rose, his heart swelled with hope for the first time in years. News of Kelechi's rescue of the princess, and his subsequent transfer to the palace, eventually trickled back to Abkar. A woman returning from the market rushed to Ebil's hut, her voice trembling with excitement. "Ebil, Tijioke," she shouted, panting as she reached their compound. "Your son, Kelechi, the one you lost to Alhaji Musa." Ebil dropped the pot she was carrying, its contents spilling across the dusty ground. Tijioke froze where he sat, staring at the woman as if her words were a mirage. "What about Kelechi?" Ebil demanded, her voice sharp with both fear and hope. "He's no longer with Alhaji Musa," the woman said, her eyes wide with wonder. "The king of Ikediru has taken him into his palace. They say your son saved the princess from drowning in the river. The king himself declared him a palace guard." Ebil's hands flew to her mouth as her knees buckled. "Kelechi," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tijioke stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Are you sure? Are you certain it's him?" The woman nodded vigorously. "I swear it is true. I saw him with my own eyes when I passed through Ikediru. He was standing tall beside the princess, dressed in a new cloth, though still thin. The king has taken him in." Ebil collapsed to the ground, her cries rising into the air like a wounded bird. "Thank you, God," she sobbed. "Thank you for keeping my son alive." Tijioke knelt beside her, his strong hands trembling as he held her. Tears spilled freely down his weathered cheeks. "Our son. He's alive, Ebil. He's alive." Their hearts swelled with relief. A new fear gripped them. Kelechi was now the king's property, and no one in their culture approached the king without being summoned. To do so unbidden was to risk grave punishment. Moreover, the king had purchased Kelechi from Alhaji Musa, making him the rightful owner. "What can we do?" Ebil asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "I want to see him. I want to hold my son again." Tijioke stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "We cannot go to the palace," he said softly. "It is forbidden. If we anger the king, he may cast Kelechi out, or worse." Ebil clutched her wrapper, her tears soaking its fabric. "I miss him so much. Do you think he remembers us?" Tijioke's voice cracked as he replied. "How could he forget? We are his parents. But we must trust God, Ebil. He has kept Kelechi alive this far." Days turned into weeks, and the longing to see Kelechi grew unbearable. Ebil's nights were restless, her dreams filled with visions of her son standing tall in the king's palace, his face older but his eyes still carrying the pain of his absence. One night, as the rain poured heavily on the thatched roof of their hut, Ebil knelt in the corner of their tiny home. Her hands were clasped tightly, her voice rising above the storm. "God of mercy, I thank you for sparing my son's life," she prayed, tears streaming down her face. "But my heart aches for him, Lord. Please, grant him favor in the sight of the king. Let him remember the parents who love him. And if it is your will, bring him back to us." Dijioke joined her, his deep voice trembling as he added his own prayer. "Father, we are weak, but you are strong. Watch over our son. Protect him in that palace. And, Lord, touch the heart of the king. Let him see Kelechi not as a servant but as a child who belongs to his family." In the palace of Ikediru, Kelechi's life was both a blessing and a challenge. The king's favor protected him from mistreatment, but the weight of being in the royal court was heavy. He often thought of his parents, wondering if they knew where he was, if they prayed for him, if they still cried themselves to sleep as he sometimes did. One evening, as he stood guard by the palace gates, the princess approached him. Her delicate features were framed by the glow of the setting sun, but her eyes were filled with kindness. "Kelechi," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. He straightened, bowing slightly. "Your Highness." "I've been watching you," she said, stepping closer. "You are quiet, but there is a strength in you that others don't see. Do you miss your family?" The question caught him off guard, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and he swallowed hard before answering. "Every day, Your Highness." Her face softened. "Do you think they know you are here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I pray they do." The princess hesitated before placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved my life, Kelechi. I owe you more than I can ever repay. If there's anything I can do for you, tell me." Kelechi's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly blinked them away. "Thank you, Your Highness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your kindness is enough." But deep down, his heart ached for home, for the embrace of his mother, the steady voice of his father, and the simple joy of being a boy in Abkar once more. The atmosphere in the palace had grown heavy with tension, though no one dared to speak of it openly. The once vibrant Princess Adanna had become a shadow of herself. Her laughter, which once rang through the royal halls, was now replaced with soft, muffled sobs heard late at night. Her parents, King Olumide and Queen Ezen, watched in growing worry as their daughter sunk deeper into despair. Adanna lay restless on her bed, her silken sheets tangled around her. She gripped them tightly as tears soaked her pillow. Her dreams were relentless, vivid flashes of Kelechi's face, his strong arms pulling her from the icy grasp of the river. His voice echoed in her mind, "I won't let you go." But the dreams always turned dark. In them, she found herself drowning again, her body sinking deeper as Kelechi stood helpless on the shore, bound by invisible chains. She would cry out for him, her voice raw and desperate. "Kelechi, please save me. Don't let go of me." And then she would wake, gasping for air, her chest heaving with the ache of unspoken words. One morning, the queen entered her daughter's chambers to find Adanna staring blankly at her reflection in the mirror. Her once radiant face was pale, her eyes hollow. "Adanna," Queen Ezen said gently, sitting beside her. "What is troubling you, my child? You have hardly eaten, and your nights are restless. Tell me what plagues your heart." Adanna's lips quivered, but she said nothing. How could she tell her mother that her heart belonged to a man she could never have? The queen sighed and stroked her daughter's hair. "Is it the marriage to Chief Ogbona's son? I know you have no feelings for him, but it is tradition. You must marry to strengthen the bonds between our families." Adanna shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not that, Mama." "Then what is it, my daughter?" the queen pressed. Adanna hesitated, her hands trembling in her lap. "Mama, have you ever loved someone so much it feels like you cannot breathe without them?" The queen's eyes widened. "Adanna, who is it?" Adanna turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "I cannot say." In another part of the palace, Kelechi wrestled with his own turmoil. Every day he stood guard near the royal chambers, and every day he felt the weight of Adanna's gaze on him. She would look at him with a softness that made his heart ache, but he dared not meet her eyes for too long. He knew the consequences of such foolishness. She is a princess, he told himself again and again. And I am nothing but a servant. Yet his heart betrayed him, filling with longing every time she passed by. He replayed the memory of her hand brushing his shoulder, the softness in her voice when she asked if he missed his family. But he knew the penalty for a palace guard falling in love with a member of the royal family: banishment at best, death at worst. The king grew increasingly concerned as Adanna's condition worsened. One night, her cries shattered the stillness of the palace. "Kiriti," she screamed from her bed, trashing wildly. "Don't let go of me. Please don't let go." The king and queen rushed into her chambers, their faces etched with worry. The maids tried to calm her, but Adanna was inconsolable. "Who is Kiriti?" the king demanded, his deep voice shaking the room. One of the maids hesitated before replying. "Your Majesty, Kiriti is one of the palace guards. The boy who saved the princess." The king frowned, his mind racing. He remembered Kiriti well, the brave boy who had risked his life to save his daughter. But why was Adanna calling his name in her sleep? The queen placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Olumide, we must speak with the boy. Something is not right." The king nodded reluctantly. "Bring him to me at once." When Kiriti was summoned to the royal chambers, his heart pounded like a war drum. He couldn't imagine why the king wanted to see him, but he feared the worst. "Kiriti," the king began, his piercing eyes fixed on the boy. "My daughter has been calling your name in her dreams. She wakes crying for you. What do you know of this?" Kiriti's mouth went dry. He dropped to his knees, bowing low. "Your Majesty, I swear I have done nothing inappropriate. I have only ever served you faithfully." The queen stepped forward, her voice softer. "Kelechi, we do not accuse you of anything. But we must understand why Adanna is so troubled. She refuses to tell us what is in her heart. Please, if you know anything, speak." Kiriti's voice trembled as he replied, "Your Majesties, I do not know why the princess calls my name. I would never dare." But his words faltered as Adanna appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "It's because I love him," she said, her voice breaking. The room fell silent. "Adanna," the king thundered, his face dark with rage. But she stepped forward, her chin trembling but her eyes defiant. "I love him, father. From the moment he saved my life, I knew he was the one. I cannot marry Ogbonna's son. My heart belongs to Kelechi." Kiriti looked up, his face a mask of shock and fear. "Your Highness, please." "Silence," the king roared. He turned to the guards. "Take him away. Lock him up until I decide his fate." "No," Adanna cried, throwing herself in front of Kelechi. "Father, please. Don't hurt him. This is my fault. I love him, but he has done nothing wrong." The king hesitated, his fury warring with the love he had for his daughter. "Take her to her chambers," he ordered the maids. "And take him to the dungeons." As Kelechi was dragged away, his eyes met Adanna's. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face as she called after him. "Kelechi, I will save you. I promise." The palace grew colder in spirit, even as the sun blazed outside its walls. Queen Ezin sat in her chambers, her heart heavy with the torment of her daughter's cries and the sight of her husband's growing anger. Adanna was slipping further into despair, and Kelechi languished in the dungeons, yet the king seemed unyielding. That night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Queen Ezin made a decision. She could no longer remain silent. Her daughter's life, her very sanity, was at stake. Fearful but resolute, she went to the king's private quarters. The king, Olumide, sat at his desk, his expression grim as he examined royal documents. When the queen entered, he glanced up briefly, his brows furrowing. "Ezin, it's late. Why are you here?" She approached him, her hands clasped tightly. "Olumide, I need to speak with you about Adanna." The king sighed, leaning back in his chair. "If you've come to plead on behalf of that boy, you waste your breath." "It's not just about Kiriti," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's about our daughter, our only child. Olumide, can't you see she is dying inside? She has stopped eating. She spends her nights crying. She wakes from nightmares screaming his name. I fear we will lose her. The king's face darkened. She is young and foolish. She will recover in time. But what if she doesn't? Ezin pressed, stepping closer. What if forcing her to marry Chief Ogbona's son destroys her? Olumide, I beg you, let her marry for love, not duty. This tradition, this culture of forcing our children to marry for alliances, has caused nothing but misery. Shouldn't her happiness matter more than our ambitions? The king's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Do you think I am blind to her suffering? Do you think this is easy for me? His voice rose, and for a moment, the queen shrank back. He stood, towering over her as he continued. You speak of love, but you forget the weight of this throne. You forget the reason for this tradition. Shall I remind you of what happened the last time a royal dared to defy this custom? Ezin's heart pounded, but she nodded, her voice faint. Tell me. The king began, his voice heavy with both anger and sorrow. Many years ago, my uncle's daughter, Princess Neka, fell in love with a commoner, much like Adanna. She defied her betrothal to a nobleman's son and secretly wed the man she loved. When the elders discovered her betrayal, they declared her marriage void and cursed her family. The curse did not end there. The nobleman's family demanded vengeance. They accused my uncle of failing to honor their alliance. That same year, they led a raid on the palace, killing Neka's husband and their infant child. Neka herself was dragged to the village square and stoned to death as a warning to others. The queen gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Olumide. But he wasn't finished. You ask me to discard tradition as though it is a simple matter. Do you not see the weight of the throne we carry? If Adanna defies this custom, it will not be just her who suffers. Our family will be branded as traitors to the elders. The people will rise against us. I will lose my throne, my life, and you may lose yours as well. Do you want that for our daughter? Ezin's knees buckled, and she sunk onto a nearby chair. Her voice trembled as she spoke. But Olumide, there must be another way. Must we sacrifice her happiness, her very life, for the sake of this tradition? The king's expression softened briefly, but his resolve remained unshaken. I love Adanna, Ezin. But as king, I must think beyond love. I must think of our people, our legacy. She will marry Chief Ogbona's son, as is her duty. The queen returned to her chambers that night, her body trembling with fear and anguish. She lay awake, her mind spinning with thoughts of Neka's tragic fate and the potential doom awaiting her family if Adanna refused to follow tradition. The weight of it all became too much to bear. By morning, Queen Ezin was too weak to leave her bed. Her ladies-in-waiting surrounded her, whispering in hushed tones as she lay pale and trembling. Send for the physician, one of them said. No, Ezin murmured, her voice barely audible. There is no cure for a broken heart. Adanna entered the room and burst into tears at the sight of her mother. Mawai, what is wrong? Please tell me. Ezin reached for her daughter's hand, her eyes filling with tears. My child, I am afraid for you, for your father, for us all. If you defy tradition, the consequences will be grave. But if you obey, I fear it will break your spirit. I don't know what to do. Adanna knelt beside her mother, her tears falling freely. Mama, I don't care about tradition or consequences. I love Kelechi. I cannot marry another man. Ezin's heart ached at her daughter's words, but she said nothing. She only held Adanna's hand, praying silently for a miracle. The tension in the kingdom was like a tightly wound string, ready to snap. Rumors of Princess Adanna's forbidden love had begun to swirl beyond the palace walls, carried on the tongues of palace workers and curious villagers. Whispers reached the Ogbonna family, and what was once a quiet storm became a raging tempest. It was a warm evening when a messenger arrived at the palace gates, carrying a sealed letter bearing the insignia of Chief Ogbonna's house. The guards ushered him into the king's presence. The messenger, a young but nervous man, knelt before King Olumide, holding out the scroll with shaking hands. The king took the letter from him, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he dismissed the messenger with a wave of his hand. The room was silent except for the rustling of the parchment as the king unrolled it. His eyes scanned the words, and with every line, his jaw tightened, his face darkening like a storm cloud gathering force. The queen, sitting beside him, saw his growing anger. "What is it, Olumide? What does the letter say?" Wordlessly, the king handed her the letter. Queen Ezin's hands trembled as she accepted it. She read silently, her lips moving slightly with the words, and her face paled. When she was done, she clutched the letter to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is madness," she whispered. This boy dares to speak to you in such a manner." The king stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "It is not just madness, it is insolence. A child, no, an ungrateful brat, threatening me, a king. He has insulted my throne and my family. I will not let this go unanswered." The queen placed the letter gently on the table, her voice trembling. "Olumide, think carefully. This could lead to bloodshed. Perhaps we should speak with Chief Ogbonna before taking any action." The king's voice thundered through the room. "Speak with him? That child has already declared war. Does he think I am weak, that I will bow to his arrogance? I swear on this throne that Ogbonna will never marry my daughter, not unless he crawls to this palace and kisses the dust at my feet." Meanwhile, in Chief Ogbonna's household, tensions were equally high. When the younger Ogbonna, bold and impulsive, sent his threatening letter, he did so without his father's approval. "You fool!" Chief Ogbonna thundered when he learned of it. "Do you realize what you have done? You have insulted the king of Ibkar. You risk plunging our family, and our entire community, into ruin." "I did what you would not, father," the younger Ogbonna retorted, his voice defiant. "You sit and wait while your son's honor is dragged through the mud. I will not stand for it. You will not stand for it." Chief Ogbonna's voice was a low growl. "Do you think this is a child's game? Do you think the king will take your threats lightly? He could send his armies here tomorrow and wipe us out." "Let him try," the younger Ogbonna snapped. "I will face him head-on. If he will not give me what is mine, I will take it by force." Chief Ogbonna stared at his son, his face a mask of rage and disappointment. "You have brought shame to this family. I should have raised a wiser son." The message from the Ogbonna household spread like wildfire. Villagers in both communities began preparing for the worst. Some fled their homes, fearing the looming war. Others sharpened their weapons, eager to defend their land. Back in the palace, Adanna grew pale with dread as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. "Father," she said one evening, falling to her knees before the king. "I beg you, please, let me speak to Ogbonna. Perhaps I can convince him to see reason." The king looked at her, his expression softening briefly before hardening again. "You will do no such thing. That boy has insulted our family, threatened our kingdom, and disrespected me as a king. If he comes to this palace, it will be to beg for forgiveness, not to negotiate terms." "But father," Adanna pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "This is my life. Shouldn't I have a say in what happens to me?" The king's voice was firm but not unkind. "You are my daughter, Adanna. I love you more than life itself. But this is not just about you. This is about the throne, our people, our legacy. You must trust that I am doing what is best for all of us." The queen, however, was losing strength by the day. The stress and fear of impending war, combined with her worry for Adanna, were taking a toll on her health. She lay in her chambers, too weak to rise, her breath shallow and labored. "Ezin," the king said one evening, sitting by her bedside, "you must find your strength. I cannot fight this battle alone." She looked at him with weary eyes. "Olumide, I fear for us all. I fear for Adanna, for you, for this kingdom. What if this war destroys everything we have built?" The king took her hand, his voice steady. "It will not come to that. I will protect this family and this kingdom with my life if I must." But as the days passed and the full moon drew closer, the tension in the palace grew unbearable. The king's fury burned hotter, the queen's health declined further, and Adanna's tears flowed like a river. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a silver glow over the palace as a light breeze rustled the curtains in Princess Adanna's chambers. She sat by the window, her once bright eyes now dim with longing and her heart heavy with thoughts of Kiriti. She could still see his determined face as he dove into the river to save her, a moment that had changed her life forever. But how could she save him from the dungeon, from a fate he didn't deserve? Her trusted maid, Nena, entered the room quietly. Nena was the one who had screamed for help when the princess was drowning and the one who had been at her side through every tear, every sigh, and every unspoken word since Kiriti's imprisonment. "My lady," Nena whispered, kneeling beside her, "I have an idea. It may be dangerous, but if you truly want to know him, if you want to help him, you must take this risk." Adanna looked at her with desperation. "What do you mean, Nena? What can I do? My hands are tied." Nena leaned in closer. "The leader of the prison guards, Ogdenvai, is a man who can be swayed with the right persuasion. If we offer him enough gold, he might allow you to visit Kelechi in secret. You could bring him food, speak with him, and learn more about the man who has stolen your heart." Adanna hesitated, her heart pounding. "What if we are caught? My father will never forgive me. Kelechi could be punished even more severely." Nena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I would never suggest this if I thought it would bring you harm. Trust me, my lady. Ogdenmai is loyal to gold, not to the rules. If we are careful, no one will know." The princess closed her eyes, her mind racing. The thought of seeing Kiriti again, hearing his voice, and knowing the man behind the quiet strength gave her a flicker of hope. "Very well," she said at last. "Let us try. But we must be cautious." The next day, Nena approached Ogdenmai in the shadows of the palace grounds. The aging guard, with a scar running across his cheek and a greedy glint in his eyes, listened carefully as she spoke. When she slipped a small pouch of gold coins into his hand, he grinned. "You have my word," he said. "Twice a week, after the changing of the guards, I will allow her into the dungeon. But if anyone finds out, I will deny everything." Nena nodded, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. The plan was set.